Hello, voidlings. Cat again. And I'm here today to take you back into the art void. Not just any part of the art void, though. We're going into the far past. Specifically, we're going to go visit the Etruscans. Why the Etruscans? Well, it's Women's History Month, and the Etruscans are one of my favorite cultures. They were a little forward-thinking for their time. I also want to take you there because the Etruscan people, culture, and art is where I draw a lot of inspiration from. So, let me share some of the fun bits about the Etruscans today, and maybe it can bring you some inspiration too in your artwork. Art from the Etruscan period and how they lived and what they did are great things to have in your toolkit to help design a culture. And we'll be doing this a ton. I love ancient civilizations, and I think it offers something very unique. It's also grounded in how cultures came to be, how they rise and how they fall. Let me slide us into ancient history and go visit the Etruscans. Who were the Etruscans? According to the Met Museum article written by Colette Hemingway, the Etruscans were an ancient Italic culture linguistically identifiable by about 700 BC. Their culture developed from a prehistoric civilization known as Villanovan, circa about 900 to 500 BC. By the beginning of the 7th century BC, the Etruscans occupied the central region of Italy between the Arno and the Tiber rivers, and eventually settled as far north as the Po River Valley and as far south as Campania. If you wanted to walk on the same ground as the ancient Etruscans, you would need to visit Tuscany, Italy, around the 3rd century CE. The Romans, instead of calling it Etruria, called it Tuscia, and Tuscia, over time, linguistically metamorphosed into Tuscany. Colette Hemingway goes on to say, much of what we know about the Etruscans comes not from historical evidence, but from their art and archaeological record. Many Etruscan sites, primarily cemeteries and sanctuaries, have been excavated, notably at Vie, Cerveteri, Tarquinia, Vulci, and Vetulonia. Numerous Etruscan tomb paintings portray in vivid color many different scenes of life, death, and myth. Etruscan art has a place in my heart because this was a culture unique among the surrounding civilizations of the time period. Men and women were elevated to near equal status. Just check out this sarcophagus with its elaborate sculpture of a reclining woman. Alone, it isn't a telltale sign that Etrurian women held more equal status, but in context to their funerary practices, we see their place in society. Since the cemeteries were often a mirror of the living world, we can glean a lot of information from them. Often, a family would have a tomb in which immediate and extended family were buried. This is notably different from the Greeks and Romans, who only buried immediate family together, whereas the Etruscans' more inclusive sense of family shows their deep interconnective community. Women and their husbands often shared a burial chamber and were placed in positions of equal import. Sarcophagi symbols did indicate a difference between the sexes, a circle placed for men and a triangle for women. Which I find incredibly interesting for our modern shape language. For instance, triangles are almost always correlated with sharpness, direction, and often sort of get gendered as masculine shapes or villainous shapes, whereas circles are almost notoriously feminine, round, curvy, and not to sound crass, but the feminine whole. This shape language, this contemporary idea of triangles being masculine and circles being feminine, doesn't actually hold up across the board. For instance, the LGBTQ plus symbol for lesbian is a triangle. So there's room and adjustment for it. It really depends on how your culture informs your shape language. I'm really curious on what informed the Etruscans. The equal status between men and women didn't end there. We know that the Etruscans also dined with women who had far more freedom. How do we know? Because a Greek historian of the day had some butthurt and sassily angry things to say on the matter. Theopompus of Chios, the aforementioned Greek historian, was appalled that women, and I quote, were expert drinkers and very good-looking, end quote. Oh, and he prattles on that the more liberated women of Etruria dine not with their own husbands, but with any men who happen to be present, end quote. The mere act of a woman being present in some of these parties flew directly in opposition to the Greek symposia, which was a glorified frat party, men only, no women allowed. Women also played a role doing traditional female tasks such as working textiles, but they were also dancers, musicians, and athletes. Women were also depicted in Etruscan ancient art and religious works. Women were renowned for their knowledge and mastery of the spiritual world, so much so that even the Romans held Etruscans' spiritual advisorship in a high regard, consulting them on how to rule and the timing of military strategy. The spiritual leadership of priestesses was far more outward-facing than in any other Mediterranean culture. Remember sad boy Theopompus? Well, he went on to criticize Etruscan women so harshly, and if you read between his caustic lines, it becomes very simple. Cultures surrounding and interacting with the Etruscans, from the Greeks, Romans, and other trading civilizations at the time, often suffered from culture shock, especially around the status of women in Etruscan society. Etruscan women were not only confident and took care of their bodies, but they were assertive. Etruscan art and their motifs are beautiful examples of a thriving and rich culture. There's so much within their great creative works that we can use as inspiration. From swirling and geometric patterns, as seen here on these vases, to clothing and colors, this ancient culture is a great example of equality between the sexes. They were accepting, vibrant, and keen to swathe themselves and their tombs in glorious artistic beauty. So how can we bring Etruria forward in our work today? Consider allowing yourself to be inspired by their style, their jewelry. Check out this pair of earrings made with scarabs, their hairstyles, or perhaps the very land they once walked. So the next time you're coming up with some designs, or even making concept art for a unique fantasy culture, consider bringing some of the Etruscan art into your palette. Well, that's all for today, Voidlings. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about the Etruscans and their art and culture. Oh, and before you go, don't forget to like and subscribe, you know the jazz, and also to ding the bell on your way out of the door. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you. See you next time. Bye.